Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third installment of our online community book discussions of our 2023 selection, The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You by Maurice Carlos Ruffin. I'm Megan Holt. I'm the executive director of One Book, One New Orleans, which, as most of you know, selects one book every year, encourages everyone in the community to read that same book at the same time, and then hosts a series of free family-friendly programming around that book, like the event you're at tonight. But in doing this, we also have to recognize that approximately 27% of the adults in our city struggle with literacy and access to books every single day. So in order to break down those barriers, we develop a curriculum around the book every year, and we get the book and its curriculum free of charge into adult education programs, into all the branches of the New Orleans Public Library, into education programs in both adult and juvenile prisons, and last but not least, into the blind and print handicapped ears through a partnership with WRBH Reading Radio. And I am not going to say much more than that. You get the gist of it. Instead, I'm going to turn this evening over to our lovely facilitator, Nikki Ummel, co-founder of lnml Lit, and an all-around awesome creative writer in her own right. She just had a recent publication, I'm not mistaken. And she'll facilitate this night's discussion. So thank you, Nikki.
Hey, thank you all for having me. I'm really excited. Maurice is one of my favorite people ever, not to mention one of the most brilliant writers I've ever known. So it's a real honor to be able to do this with his book. So I specifically wanted to focus this discussion on what I've been calling the short shorts, because these are all short stories, but some of them are very short. Sometimes the word used is flash fiction. I like short shorts or micros as well. But these kind of run the gamut between all three of those shorter fiction definitions. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is when looking at these short shorts. So I specifically went with stories that were under 2 or 3 pages. What did you all notice about the narrators? I noticed that a lot of these stories had threads that went between all of them that weren't necessarily in the book as a whole.
The first time I encountered the second person narration, I was thrown off.
Mm-hmm.
I had to like ease into that.
Yeah, that is with all of these that we're focusing on tonight, that is the only not first person. The rest of the shorts that we're going to talk about are all in the first person perspective. So it is a little jarring when you put them back to back like that. Anything else come to mind?
I just think if the first person and then the one in the second person just gives such a sense of immediacy, you know, there's not a lot of wind up or backswing. It's just, you're right there, like in that moment. And of course, like you said, in a short short, you don't have a lot of time anyway, but it was just that times 1,000.
Yeah, that's exactly my thinking. When you're first person and when in that one that's second person, you're dropped in the middle of it versus like when it's third person, you have to do the character development. Well, when you are the character, you're developed very rapidly because you're in your own thoughts, you're observing it from your perspective. Even just the way that things are described says a lot about the narrator and the speaker that you've been dropped into versus like being like, Jimmy hates going to work. You know what I mean? Like it just takes a lot longer to get into that. And what I love about these short shorts is like everything is compressed. Like every word matters. It has to be tweezed in a different way than a 22-page story. And specifically the final lines in all of these pieces are very punchy. I don't know if anyone else noticed that, but they always end with a bang, like these really incredible, just like gut punches. And I'm not saying longer pieces can't have that, but it's got a totally different effect when it's in 4 paragraphs versus over 30 pages. Any thoughts on that?
Kind of riffing
I
off
had
the
yeah, go ahead,
line,
Megan.
"We don't know him," which is how the "Places I Couldn't Go" closes. That is the most gut-wrenching line for me in the book. We don't know him.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that gave me goosebumps just thinking about that. I noticed that almost all of the characters or all of the speakers in these focus stories are male and working class for the most part, besides maybe arguably the second person piece, Token, because there's lots of mention of, you know, being in suits and being in business meetings and things like that. But the rest of the speakers are, you know, born into, you know, a bug not termite, but like extermination company, or working at a gas station. Even the cop, you know, we know in our city cops don't make billions of dollars. So I thought that was really interesting that in so many ways Maurice is placing us in New Orleans, but in a lot of times in these stories, New Orleans is not mentioned, New Orleans is not referenced, but we know just because of the dynamics we're being told about the speaker that we are either in New Orleans or a place very similar to New Orleans.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stood out to me was like in every story, there was always like an aha moment. Like it's just like something connected the dots to the person in the story. It was like, this is the moment when I decide to move away. This is the moment I decide, you know, to move to New York, or I don't want to be a part. It was always this moment in the stories. And that's what kind of stood out to me.
Yeah, in my notes, I wrote that as the reveal. Like there's a reveal in every single one of these stories, whether it's the, you know, realizing that his ex had the kid and that's possibly his kid in the gas station. And she says, we don't know him, right? Like he's watching the life he could have had drive away. We've got, the moment when we realize in Cocoon that our speaker has to leave because he feels like, or they have to leave. I guess there's no pronouns because they don't feel like that is where they can be themselves. Even like in the Mercury Forges, right? The reveal that the father has died. And so there is that like big moment in these short, seemingly small stories that are not small at all.
Yeah, on that note, and relating to what you said about the final line, every single one of them, no matter how short the story was, I found to be completely satisfying. Like everything was delivered, and like you said, that tweezing in the words, like I could see really the thought and intention that went into crafting every single sentence so that they do pack that punch.
Yeah, I was trying to keep note of like clues. I don't know if anyone else did this. Like when you got to the reveal, you're like, what were the clues along the way? That because whether you realize it or not, it's building towards that. And when you go back, you're like, oh, so like in Cocoon, which I think was my favorite one, he says, or the speaker says in the first paragraph, I did my best to keep my objections hidden. So you're like, oh, maybe the speaker objects to working as an exterminator. And I certainly never told him about my proclivities. Like that word proclivities, that's a sign that like, okay, somebody revealed about the speaker that is like considered not normal or not accepted where the speaker's located. And so, and then we have the reveal towards, or on the second page, specifically Tyrone seeing the speaker in a dress. And it was like, oh, that little moment, the proclivities, that was the key to this reveal. I don't know, do we want to stay on Cocoon for a minute? Anyone else have observations? there's the two most important parts of the piece, the last line and the first line. Oh, the last line and the last line. Oh, wow. Yeah. I think that really resonates with these.
So I guess going off of your, let's stay on Cocoon for a second and what might have been the clues. It was really interesting that the father had named the company and son. He said, even before I was born. And I thought that was another clue that, why is he talking about and son?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe hinting at.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. And that is brilliant. Yeah, from the beginning, it's we have a very specific genderization, even though the child wasn't born, even though he didn't know if and who the child would be. Yeah.
Just looking back at it, there's really only 3 lines of dialogue. I mean, it's just, everything is so intentional. It's just unbelievable to me how this is crafted. I wanted to jump back really quickly to your comment about New Orleans as the setting too. I was thinking about just how rooted in family and relationships the stories are. And it almost feels like New Orleans is a character in a way, or the context for the family. I'm not saying it very elegantly, but it just feels so present and so impactful, I guess.
Yeah. I completely agree with you that, especially when you take the collection as a whole, New Orleans is the through line, is the living and breathing character throughout the whole book, in a way that I don't know if I've seen that so impactfully done. I don't know if impactfully is a word, but I know that people can do this really well with like New York, right? New York City. And been part of that's because New York's so big in our cultural consciousness. And I think Maurice really, really makes an incredible argument for the way that New Orleans is in our collective consciousness in a way that we might not even realize, not just as like citizens of the city, but like across the whole country.
I think there are greater rewards if you are familiar with the culture of this city.
Yeah. Like what in these pieces specifically? What in these pieces stands out to you for that?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have my book right now. Okay. And I haven't reviewed these specific stories in a minute. And one thing that really stood out to me throughout the whole book, the whole collection of the stories, was the food. There was always some mention of food that I really felt, just brought it back home.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that's a real strong indicator of where we are. And as you pointed out before, all the working class characters, like those are the characters of our city.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, it was just all the different characters, just the different cultural differences here. It kind of touched on race. It touched on sexual orientation. It just touched on everything here, like in the city, because everything is like a melting pot. So it was just like all the stories hit, I felt like a group that identifies as part of New Orleans, and it just kind of all came together.
Yeah, I wrote underneath pretty much every story when I was taking notes. Most of these stories deal with father-son relationships or male relationships. So we have Mercury Forges, which is both father-son, but then also like our cop and Mercury, who's incarcerated, right? But they have this really human transcendent moment. And then we've got Bixby, who I can't wait for us to get to that one, but Bixby is talking to his friend Kyle about his romantic relationships. And then The Places I Couldn't Go is, that one's a little different because it's a romantic relationship. Same with the election one, which is the only female speaker that's identified as a female directly as a as a woman, in all these shorts. And then the spar is, you know, our bullying, reversal male relationship role. So yeah, the exploration of specifically, you know, those types of relationships. We've got 2 examples of romantic relationships, and the rest are male friendships or male or father son. I don't know. What did y'all think about that? I couldn't. Once I saw that, I was like, okay, what are you doing, Maurice? What are we exploring here? Especially in the context of New Orleans, as we're talking about.
I think what I would say, as someone who was not born and raised here, Latoya, you kind of mentioned that the stories touch on folks and that interact with the city in so many different ways or have different relationships to it. And that really kind of means something to me, because of course my experience of the city is not going to be yours, and it's not going to be someone who's born and raised here. And I don't know if he's trying to explore that. That's what it feels like to me as a relative outsider. And I also wonder about just the importance of relationships generally in New Orleans. You know, it seems like it does depend on who you know, and the relationships are pretty key. And it's an interesting way to write about it. It's definitely not head on. It seems like it's more of an investigation, which I really love.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going, because I'm not from here as well. But it was, you get stories from the viewpoint of a thief to the police to a politician, you know, from someone who's passing to, it was just every different part of the city was, you know, addressed in some story one way or the other. And I think it like stood out to me because I'm not from here. So it was just all like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember seeing this in action. So it was all covered in one of the stories. So I thought that was kind of fascinating.
Hey, Michael, can you mute your mic, please? If you can hear us. Or if Megan, if you have the capacity to mute. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I guess for me, kind of like what both of y'all just said was how important relationships are in New Orleans in a capacity that's different from any other city I've lived in or visited. It is very personal. Everyone here is very personal. And even if it's someone you don't know, it's good morning, it's how are you? It's stopping in the middle of the street because someone in the car in front of you is talking to someone someone in the car next to them, or you know, I did that yesterday. I saw someone in the CBD stopped in the middle of traffic to say hi. It's, you just don't see that happen in other places. This familiarity, even if it's someone that you don't know. And I think a big part of, yeah, I guess I'll stop with that and see if anyone has a response to that, or anything from the stories that kind of gives way to that.
Now that I'm thinking about it, it kind of strikes me how they weren't really like expected relationships. So I'm thinking in Cocoon when he talks not to his dad, but to his dad's employee. In Bigsby, he's talking not to his love interest, but to his bartender. In Zimmerman, he's talking about his employee and his employee's girlfriend, not necessarily someone he's like really close to. I hadn't thought about that, but now I'm thinking about it more.
Yeah, I think that's a very New Orleans thing. Like, how many of us have had some of our most meaningful conversations on a parade route or when your car broke down on I-10 and that one person stopped to help you. And I've had some of the most magical moments with people I didn't know in the city, or didn't know in the traditional sense, you know.
And then thinking of Mercury Forges, that one, I don't know why that I keep going back to that story, but the relationship there is sort of non-traditional as well. And what seems to stop the deputy from performing his quote unquote job is this need to tend to a family member that has passed. And that's what takes priority in a really tragic situation. So it's an interesting sort of twist or pivot. And a level of care too. Yeah, that just kind of trailed out there. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, the line for me that where that pivot happens is, I liked his dad, but that shouldn't have mattered at the moment. And it's like one of those, it didn't matter if I liked this man or not. I knew what I had to do because this is the human thing to do. And sometimes that transcends all other obligations. And that also feels very New Orleans, right? Like, doesn't matter if you like your neighbor, you go to check on your neighbor when the power's out to make sure that they, you know, aren't overheating or whatever. Or check on their house if you're the first one back from the hurricane. Like, that is, yes, some things are more important than our individual human things. I'm not expressing this very well. But yeah, that moment felt very transcendent to me.
Yeah, now that we're kind of talking about it, I'm thinking about it, like from what Megan was saying, every story just seems like at some point, like one character could understand the motivation of the other character. They might not necessarily agree with it, but they can at least see it. It was almost like they saw themselves in the other person. So it was like, okay, there was a level of understanding that happened between them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going back to Cocoon, we have Tyrone, right, who says on page 12, can't stay wrapped up in what you come from, he'd say. And then that ending, do you know what this is? He asked. It's what moths come from, I said. And so it's not explicitly said. We don't have Tyrone going, it's okay, it's important to be yourself, like, get out there. But there's this implicit understanding that transpires between the two that we get to witness. It's almost like watching it on in a movie, right? Like, this is so vivid and so real, and yet so much is not said. But the way that it's portrayed to us, we know what's not been said. Does that make sense? That's powerful.
I was kind of thinking that too, Nikki. It makes these stories so enjoyable because they are economical, and you get to have this kind of experience of the story playing out in your head, or at least I did. And I didn't need more said. It felt kind of perfectly whole.
Yeah. So I feel like we've all been avoiding Bigsby a little bit. It is a much different reveal than the other ones have. So I'm wondering what people's initial thoughts, and when was that moment when things pivoted for you in Bigsby? If there's a specific line that makes you go, oh wait, this is not what I thought was happening. Oh, I'm sorry. My boyfriend just came in. I don't know if that's extreme. just acknowledge him. Hi, Malcolm. You're fine.
So yeah, this is one where, you know, it was kind of like that issue I was saying here with, you know, colorism and race and everything, where it was like everyone knew it except him, to make the family go and get a sample of his DNA to get it tested. You know, it was just that, okay, how did everybody else know it? And then there was like, he refused to accept what was written on the paper. It's just, no, I don't want to, I don't accept it. I kind of felt something was up, but I don't believe it. So that was just that moment for me.
Yeah, the first clue for me was when he said, the chicks always liked me, black chicks too. And I was like, why is there a distinction there for you? Mm-hmm. And then later in that same paragraph, people would stare. At first, I thought it was because she was so good looking. And I was like, why are people staring at them then if they're out in public? And then that when we get the reveal a little later about the DNA test, I was like, oh, that's why people were staring. And he's so oblivious because he's internalized that colorism, mm-hmm. that racism so deeply that he's just refusing to see what and who he is.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where sometimes, you know, it's kind of talked about where it's just, well, Black people know, like, you know, you might pass for other people, but Black people know. So when I read this, it was just, I think this is why he was accepted by the Black girlfriend, because it's like a part of her knew. It's like she knows, even if he didn't, she was okay with it. And then like, so later on in the story, you know, it was just like, okay, he's still not accepting it, which is probably why they didn't last long.
This is one where I questioned the level of self-knowledge that the narrator attains or not. It just seemed like at the end that, do we even know if it's a guy? I think it's a guy. He just still seemed confused. And maybe that's the beauty of this story, is there are so many layers and so much woven in here. Everyone else might be getting a little closer to the truth, but maybe not him.
Yeah, because again, that last line, you know, I couldn't have her loving me for something I'm not. And I'm like, okay, wow. Okay. You will reject love instead of just accepting reality.
Yeah. I also thought it was so interesting a few lines before that when he gives her a dialect and then immediately says she didn't really talk like that. And so again, a small reveal. It's like the you know, the shirt sleeve comes up a little bit. Like we see his internalized prejudice and even the way that he's making his ex-girlfriend sound to this other person. And even though there's a little bit of a correction, it's like, actually, she didn't talk like that. He still did it. He still said it, right? Like that's such an intentional detail on Maurice's part for us to see that side of him, even if it's just for a second.
And he's still saying that she is wrong.
Yeah.
Right. But then it was also okay to be part Italian, but it's not okay to be part African. You know, it was like, okay, so that's something you have to unpack as well. So
yeah. Also, the voice of the narrator, once we realize that the narrator is self-identifying as a white man, did the voice sound off to you once we realized that? Like his own, so I'll say like, probably because I grew up with 3 sisters, you know, the chicks always liked me, Black chicks too. Man, if I went out, they'd give me the eye. You know, women don't just look a guy they don't know in the face. Am I right? Yeah, I dated some. So to me, it felt like, even though he's like actively rejecting this part of him, the way that he's speaking, especially in New Orleans, is not super white sounding. You know what I mean? Like he's just really interesting that he's almost putting on a Black dialect, but is like, no, but I'm white. I'm really white. Just thought that that was strange. And then when, in quoting his ex-girlfriend, made her sound super like stereotypically Black. And I thought that dichotomy was very revealing of who our speaker, our narrator is.
Yeah, I was actually surprised about when the reveal happened. I was expecting, because I know there was a part where he said he was expecting them to hire a PI. I was expecting like a photograph of him with his ex-girlfriend or something like that. So I was really surprised when it was like, oh, the reveal is a DNA test. Like, oh, okay, this was going beyond that. So that's what I was expecting the reveal to be.
Mm.
Yeah, Latoya, until the DNA test, I thought this was set way back further in the past than it was. So I was like, okay, you know, what do my dad say? What do my grandma say? And all their friends, you know, it's not me, baby, it's them. And I was like, okay, what era are we dealing with? But then there's 23andMe, so we know it's in the last like 5 to 7 years. And I thought that was really brilliantly done.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like the as we've talked about the class dichotomy here, he's like, oh, my family had nothing, she had everything. And that like part of their like success story was going to be moving to Old Metairie, which is like such an important New Orleans detail that if you're not here, you don't get that. But it's like Old Metairie is both expensive and pretty white.
And he really underscores the class issue with Aisha too, I think, saying that she's snooty and has her PhD or whatever. It's just kind of furthering that gap or divide.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, it almost made him sound like he didn't belong anywhere. It's like, I don't belong over here. I don't belong over here for multiple reasons on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Apparently just with Kyle drinking whiskey. That's what I got.
I like, Megan, that you said that Kyle's the bartender, because I hadn't pieced that together, but that makes perfect sense. I thought he was just doing shots with his friend, but it's even more revealing that he's confiding in a bartender. He's chilling with a bartender. Like he's not even with a group of bros or anything like that. Like he's just kind of monologuing at this bartender.
Now I'm wondering why I thought it was the bartender. Maybe I think it's because he's saying in a couple lines, pour me another one.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, don't we all kind of, if we have a favorite bar and a favorite bartender, do we not tend to use them as a confessional at some point? I know I do.
Yeah, it's also a very New Orleans thing. It doesn't happen in other places in the same way.
My bartender might know all my secrets. Sorry, y'all. Sorry, bartender. You know who you are.
Shout out to all the bartenders out there.
One other thing about the story, because he mentioned like he knew his family tree, his great-grandparents were still alive. And so I actually kind of wondered, I'm like, is he the biological descendant of his family tree? You know, is there another secret somewhere in the family that he's not aware of? It wasn't written there, but I'm like, are you just in denial, or is there a bigger story somewhere in your family tree?
That's a good point. There might be more secrets to unravel here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I thought his great grandparents passed. That's what I was thinking. It's like, okay, they could pass as Sicilians, so they did because it was easier for them. Because if he's what, in his late 20s, early 30s now, they would have been born in like 1910. So yeah, grandma and granddaddy, I can see why you would do that.
Yeah,
life would have been a lot more simple.
Great point.
But at 20-something%, 24%, couldn't have been that far back in the past, I would think.
I really love though that we have these ambiguities in all of these short stories where it could kind of go either way. Like there is a little bit of room for interpretation in this story. You're like, oh, where's the truth? Is there a lie? What's objective reality? Elise was hinting at that, right? Our narrator's unreliable. So we're not actually sure how any of this has transpired, or if we can trust all of the things that he's saying, which is very similar to Maurice's first book, right? Where the book's narrator is also unreliable in a lot of ways. But in Cocoon, for example, we have this ambiguity, like between, we don't actually know how the father felt towards his child. We know the child's understanding of the father, but we don't actually know objectively, like, if his father accepted them. Or in Mercury Forges, this ending of like, felt very like life goes on. So he told me to take him back, and that's what I did. And it's like, okay, is that because there's practical matters that need to be taken care of because there's a hurricane? Or is this like he knows that that's what he has to do regardless of feelings? And so in every story, I feel like there is this like, an election when she puts her finger over his lip, right? And she just acknowledged that, or he just said that he lies to give people hope. So she asks him, okay, well, do you love me? And before he can answer, she goes like this: is that because she knows he's about to lie, or is that because she's worried about the truth? And so I think a good story has a little bit of that mystery, and to lead to discussions like this, to say, oh, what do you think that meant? And we can all bring a little bit of ourselves into the story in that way. And I think that that's just a really beautiful thing about all of this. Any other thoughts on Bixby? Did we like our narrator in Bixby? Did we have compassion for him?
I think I had, I'm kind of like going with Megan was going. I think I had more compassion when I was thinking the story was from years ago. Less compassion now, but yeah.
Yeah.
I'll say I read it a couple times, and my first read through, I would say the narrator changed for me definitely on the second read through, obviously, because I had a different understanding of who he was. And to me, that's just, the skill of the author here, that having a little bit of knowledge completely changes the way I look at this and understand this scenario and this narrator. And probably if I read it a few more times, I would keep finding things. It's just really, really well done.
Mm-hmm. How different would Bigsby be if it was written in third person? I think I would have way less. The small amount of compassion I do feel for Bigsby, I think it would be gone if it was third person, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, and it kind of puts everybody on the same, kind of levels out the characters. You don't have that sort of inside knowledge, or I guess it's all equal from my perspective. I'm not saying this very well, but I don't think I would enjoy it as much. I don't know. It's a good question.
Well, if it was third person, there'd be an objective reality, right? Like you would see all the ways that he's wrong in a very clear thing. I think that would be the change. And I just don't think I think I'd be like, nah, nope.
Yeah, I feel like I have heard stories about this person, and very hard to scrounge up some compassion.
Right. I felt the same way about the spar on page 113, the bully story. Also know this person in real life in some capacity, and also have no tolerance for someone who's just like, yeah, I used to bully that kid, kicked his ass. Like, that doesn't make you cool or interesting. And so having that first person perspective really allowed my judgments to be held off, because I'm seeing things from his point of view. Did we like this far?
I'm sorry, which story was it? I got a little lost here.
It's okay. Page 113. The boxing story. Am I pronouncing that word wrong?
Oh, yeah.
Sparer.
I was looking at something. Thank you. Yeah, I'm with you. Yes, it's hard to say.
No, that's right. What were you saying, Megan?
I said I felt kind of bad for him at the end, because it seems like he is, amounted to a very lackluster human being. And he saw that glimmer of hope, like, oh, somebody famous, that his wife was looking at him with. And then that was so shut down. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, bully got his comeuppance. So I was really conflicted as to whether I felt bad for him or not. But I could see a glimmer of empathy there, which once again, I don't think I could have done in the third person.
Oh, yeah, I felt so bad. The hopeful look from the wife. I was like, oh my God. Yeah. I did enjoy the reversal of fortune, though. Him being in a position of power and making someone else feel insufficient or small, and having that ending where now, in a lot of regards, Carlos has a position of power, and he made him feel small by undercutting him with that never happens.
So this is one, it kind of reminded me of like the Michael Jordan, when they had his little documentary, and he would come up with these scenarios in his head in order to like get angry enough to beat his opponents, like on the court. And this is one that's very, very similar. Like, because he was bullied, did he perfect his boxing to end up becoming who he really is? So it's like, thank you for bullying me because I became the greatest boxer, but I will never acknowledge you at the same time. So it just reminded me of that Michael Jordan documentary, where it was like, nope, I'm gonna remember this, and I'm gonna take it out on everyone else. So I still didn't feel sorry for him, but it was also kind of like that moment where it was like, man, because he was bullied, he probably became the greatest boxer ever.
That's pretty great. I mean, would Carlos be Carlos without Eddie?
Right.
It also made me just think that the past is never really the past. And I mean, maybe here more than many places, but especially for these characters.
Yeah. I had that same question of like, is Carlos in this position specifically because of Eddie? And for Carlos to not acknowledge that at all. Because I'm sure at the end of the day, Carlos would prefer not to have been tortured as a child. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yeah.
And we've mentioned it a few times, but Carlos, the class here, the class issues, and the repetition, his mama was a maid. And then our narrator goes on to college. We have that reference. And so there are these lines between people in a lot of these stories, and then the way that they transcend those lines in good and for lack of a better phrase, like good and bad ways.
And it seems precarious. I mean, this line kind of towards the end. It was years later, I was downtown with the family just before I lost my good job. So it feels like Eddie may have gotten somewhere and then was going to lose it.
Yeah. Yeah, that line triple underlined. I was like, oh, this is an important detail in a story that's, you know, what, 500 words, maybe 750. It's taking up a lot of real estate. That's an important line. I don't think we've talked about glamour work yet. On page 129, with the young man being on a catering crew for part of his duty probation. Another instance of class. And the last line being another gut punch. I wish I could have told my boys the truth about everything I'd seen at that gala. All those people just living, but I knew they wouldn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
What's Maurice getting at there?
I mean, some people there were living and some people there were working. And that's a very big distinction.
And that juxtaposition of the word living with the paragraph before. The next morning I went to chill with my boys. Ain't none of them around no more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he got sent out in the tuxedo to learn something, and I mean, he did. Maybe not what he wanted to.
But I also wondered why he was okay telling them that he was fired for joyriding instead of being fired for supposedly taking, you know, a purse. Like, why was one version of the firing better than the other?
I would say,
I mean, he got fired either way. So it's just like, why? I don't know. Maybe he didn't want them to think he was a thief. I don't know, but.
Mm-hmm.
I would guess it comes down to power and powerlessness. Having someone racially profile you and getting fired because of that, versus being like, no, I got fired on my own terms. I made this choice.
That's a good point. Yeah. Like, I had fun while it lasted, type of thing. Yeah.
Did anyone notice the guy's name was Gene? So I have this whole like theory in my brain. I don't know if it's true or not. Maurice, weigh in. That the kid Gene from Catch What You Can grows up and becomes this Gene. And I have no idea if that's right or not. But Gene was the little boy with the lawnmower. And then they towed his car, and then they couldn't get the lawnmower anymore. It's like, I wonder if this is a what happened to Gene moment.
We also have Tyler in, I wrote this down too. We've got Tyler's the bartender in, or bartender's or friend in Bixby. And then in Token, on page 70, it says, don't play golf. Your name is not Tyler and you are not white. It could be any other name, but he uses Tyler and Gene again.
With a writer this thoughtful, it doesn't seem like an accident. That's very interesting. Yeah. Now I have to go reread these again. Get to.
I know. I don't think I caught the same name. I'm like, oh, yeah. Now I do want to go back and read them.
That's what I find so amazing about his writing is I've read them now probably all at least 3 times each, and I'm still catching things I didn't catch. And yeah, it's just amazing. And just this conversation, I'm making notes of things that I didn't catch that I have to go back and look for and think about more critically.
Did
Even
anyone? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to add really quickly, the descriptions of the people in the fancy party or whatever really kind of stuck with me. The men are compared to broken glass and the women's dresses tossed light. And I feel like it's atypical ways of describing appearance and also not necessarily positive, or I don't know, an aspect of pain or danger, I guess.
I love that you pointed that out, because now that you mention it, they're sharp as broken glass, toss light all over the room. It's so careless. Broken glass, tossing, just like in relation to that last line, just like a lack of awareness of their own presence and standing, and just like, it's careless. They literally kind of like ruined this kid's life, or, made his life a lot harder just by an accusation that wasn't even true. It's like the carelessness of that, the lack of understanding of who they are in that space.
Ooh, okay. I have no idea where I'm going with this thought, but riffing off of that, like if there's broken glass, if there's things scattered around the room, those are things those folks are not going to have to pick up. So it's really interesting that he describes them like that.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's brilliant.
Yeah, because now it's like, do they even realize the damage that they're causing with all of that? Yeah. This is one where I'm like, I would have loved to just have a conversation. It's like, well, what did you see? Like, what did you walk away thinking that your friends wouldn't understand?
Yeah, that's my main question at the end too, that we don't get an answer to. And again, the
Mhm.
beauty of that ambiguity here is like, they wouldn't understand. Like, what specifically did you learn that day that your boys didn't learn? And if all of your boys are gone now, has that knowledge kept you alive? Is there a connection there?
And did he learn anything about living? It's like, now that you've seen it, what did you learn about living? Do you like not take things as seriously as you did before? Do you take them more seriously? Yeah, a lot of unanswered questions there.
Did anyone else pick up on in Bixby? Oh no, in I can't say the word Mercury Forges, the fact that they take the hero to a house, a yellow house. Has that connection been made yet?
And then I did catch
you
that.
You made that connection?
Like, oh, the yellow house. Yeah, I was like, oh, the yellow house. Yeah.
And then when we were just talking about glamour work, Johnson, who's his boss that fires him, he wore yellow flowers in his pockets. Yellow flowers.
I feel like there are essays to be written here. I know. And just stories to be appreciated.
One of the things about the story Token that kind of like, can we jump back to Token?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Yeah, it was one of the things that kind of stood out to me was a lot of the other stories, it was like unspoken rules that were being discussed. And then Token, it just kind of laid them all out. Like, these are the rules that you will follow. So that was one that was kind of like, okay, we're just laying it out right here. Yeah. So that's another little thread, I think, in a lot of stories, the rules. You lie because that's what people want to hear. You act a certain way when you're around certain people. There are things you just don't speak on. There were so many unspoken rules that people were following.
What I also
Yeah.
found interesting real quick in that story was it's all one sentence. It's semicolon after semicolon. It's incredible.
What does that do?
I mean, for me, it carries me along, and it's also a little almost panicky because I was just swept along. There's no stopping. There's no finding my way, in a sense.
Yeah, that feeling of anxiety and like, oh my God, does it end? Is so like in a normal paragraph, you're like, I'm anticipating that this is going to break soon. There's going to be punctuation. I'm going to have an indent to the next paragraph, but this is all one long paragraph. And so you don't have that. It's relentless.
Yeah, this one, it struck me with this sense of urgency. Like I had just run into this guy and he's like in a stairwell and he's like, I got to get this out really fast. Like just like spitting it all out. So it gave me that sense of anxiety as I was reading it.
What's the difference between using the second person here? Would we feel that anxiety if it wasn't first person?
I don't think so. I feel like maybe then we would just kind of said like this particular person, is going through something or having anxiety, a panic attack or something like that. But yeah, the change, it makes you see it in a different way.
You're being put in that position. And unlike the first person, you can't question the reality of the situation, right? Because it's you. Like whether or not you realize it, you're like, oh, this is what's actually happening. Like you just get thrown into that instead of like, well, isn't that really what happened, Bixby? It's like, no, this is what's happening to you right now. Like there's no moment to question if this is real or not. You just have to accept that it is. And I think that this would not be nearly as emotionally devastating if it were in first or third.
For me, the repetition of you really just implicates me as the reader in a way that I don't think another tense would. Yeah.
This is based off of or modeled after Jamaica Kincaid's Girl, if you haven't read it yet. And it's also very emotionally resonant. And Maurice does a wonderful job of mirroring that, but making it completely different and his own. But a similarity between the two, because Jamaica Kincaid's also a person of color, is like that, being shoved into a corner. No matter what you do, it's not the right thing. And that like internalized, that feeling of like, this is what that internalized prejudice towards yourself because you've been told that. So like in Jamaica Kincaid's, it's like, do not dress like that because it'll make you look like a slut. Do not dress like that because you are a slut. Do not dress like that because this is the slut you are becoming. And so just like that idea of like, yeah, this is predestined. And in Maurice's The Top of 71, this is how you appear to be twice the man you are. That really stuck out to me because in that moment, this is how you appear to be twice the man they think you are. This is how you appear to be twice the man you are. And in that moment, to me, that implicates like the speaker has internalized to some extent the status that people are putting on. Does that make sense? And that remnant of Bigsby at the top of 70. When you look in the mirror, never find more than a drop of yourself. You have any other thoughts on this one?
He can write a line. That's my thought.
He can write a line.
He can write a line. Like, I just feel like so many they could almost be one-line short stories and they would still pack a punch, you know? We're not going to try to do that. Liz is making a face at me. I feel like the shortest short story in history is like 6 words or something. And I'm like, yeah, Maurice could pull that off.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
That was part of what we did at the Flash Fiction Workshop a couple months back. That's what it started with, those 6 words.
It's very true. What was everyone's favorite story? I said mine was Cocoon. I just think it's so beautiful. I'm also partial to coming out stories.
I'd say I reread Cocoon probably the most. For me, Mercury Forges was probably the most powerful.
Yeah, I was going to say most impactful story, Mercury Forges, and I found myself wanting to dissect it to understand how this thing works. And it was one of those that I kept reading over again and wanting to reverse engineer.
That one for me has a really big impact as well, because I got the chance to go to the jail with Maurice, and he read that story to the folks who are being held there. And literally in that space, to see folks like them in that same situation on a page was so incredibly powerful. It was amazing.
Thank you for sharing that, Megan. Latoya, do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I was about to say, I think Glamour Work of These was probably my favorite, mainly because I'm a people watcher and I like just watching people. So for this one, I guess I kind of felt like I was him. Like I understood like what he's like, standing in that position that which actually, if it wasn't for his probation, he never would have been around these people, but just to be there and then get to see like a whole new world, I kind of related to that sometimes. Sometimes I find myself in situations where I'm like, never would have been here if it wasn't for work, but you know, fascinating to just watch everyone. So that one to me, I liked it just because I felt like I could have written that story.
Right.
Obviously a different scenario because I haven't been on probation or anything, but I could still understand where he was coming from in that story.
You know what story no one has really touched on at all is the one story written from the perspective, a clear perspective from a woman. Election. Are we adverse to this story? Do we not like it? Does it not feel as interesting or engaging as the others?
This would actually probably be my number 2.
Okay.
I really did like this story. Because it's kind of like, it's in a way, it's how I feel about certain politicians when I see them and I'm like, you're just saying what you know people want to hear, but do you really believe it? Yeah, so that story was just kind of like, from the perspective of a woman, it's like, I'm trying to figure out how to say this in a PG way. Like you just got kind of twice, you know, from the affair and then from learning that, you know, this politician that you're voting for doesn't believe what they actually say. So you kind of got gypped twice, put it like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I feel like maybe it wasn't as surprising, maybe because it's lived experience as well. But it is very beautifully written, and when you get to the end, it makes perfect sense. And I think you kind of said, Nikki, it's the finger on the lips. Don't tell me the lie, or I don't want to hear the truth. I don't know, but I love that.
Thinking about
Yeah,
it,
it's almost like
the one from tonight that has the most to do with the title of the book as a whole, right? Do you love me?
Mm-hmm.
So he maybe is one of the ones who don't say they love you, but maybe it's because she silences him. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm curious if he had said he loved her, would she have even believed him anyway? You know, it's like, you lie to everybody else, you'll lie to me too, but maybe he did. Who knows?
Yeah, this is another one that we're not directly placed in New Orleans, but so reading it for me, I'm like, oh, it's New Orleans, you know, just like the description, the kind of like easy politician, even just like our most recent news, some inappropriate behavior, some elected officials here, and like the comfortability with lying to people, with lying to your constituents. And I guess the name Roland Charoux as well. But yeah, I was like, yeah, this is, if you told me this was a real story, yep. It's nice.
I would love to have these analysis after this Zoom, Megan. These are incredible. Can I cut and paste? I don't know. I'm going to try.
Oh yeah. So the reason I'm able to pull these so easily is because I wrote the curriculum for the book. I've got it like with me.
Okay.
And I can just send that to you if you want it.
I mean, I'll pay for the work, but yes, thank you. It's amazing.
It's for the community, man. Just don't copy paste and call it your own.
Never.
You'd be surprised, man.
Oh, yeah. The place names that you mentioned and then the food is just so intriguing to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's poetry in there, really.
The food thing is all due to Liz, because once she mentioned it, I saw food everywhere where I'd overlooked the food before. And I'm like, they're eating in almost every story. They've got something. Yeah. And like for me, Liz, we're not talking about the story tonight, but the most heartbreaking moment with the food is when she goes to the grocery that used to be a po' boy stop, and now it's like the coffee shop, and she doesn't recognize the food. And that's the story about gentrification. Like that hurt my soul.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what she did eat though, like the po' boy where I'm going to save half for tomorrow and drink all the daiquiri now. I was like, oh my gosh, I know that life.
Right? I've lived that life. It was called grad school.
It is amazing work though that you've done gathering all of those the sites where we see food and love and locations. It's incredible. Well done.
I didn't realize we had a little chat going on. I'm sorry. This is amazing. Has Maurice talked about the title of the book, Megan?
Not in the conversations I've had with him.
Okay.
We'll make him talk about that another day.
Yeah, I'm so intrigued because, like you said, that the ending of "I believe you love me," and we don't know, and he doesn't say "I love you." Like, that seems like a very direct reference to the title, more than any of the other stories I've read. Or
Like that one and the title story.
Yes, yeah. The other ones always say
that line in there.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thanks, y'all, for such an engaging conversation, even though there were so few of us. I really appreciate it. Giving me so much to think about.
Thank you, Nikki.